My trail name was Coyote Jack. That's what other hikers called me along the Pacific Crest Trail. Back in the summer of 2016, honestly. It started out as a joke. Something about the way I howled at the stars after a few too many sips of whiskey one night near Kennedy Meadows. But by the time I left the Sierras behind, it felt more like a curse. Like something on that trail had marked me, and that name was the only thing that still fit. I didn't start the whole PCT from Mexico like most of the hardcore thru hikers. My plan was smaller. Join two friends who'd already made it past the desert section and meet them near Lone Pine, California, where the real wilderness began. They went by Ranger and Sticks. Ranger had hiked the Appalachian Trail before, all muscle and confidence, a natural-born scout. Sticks was his cousin, loud, funny, and perpetually broke, but he had this contagious energy that made the miles fly by. I was just along for the ride. The first few days felt like magic. The Sierra Nevada stretched endless around us, walls of granite catching the morning light. We saw more marmots than people. No cars, no noise, just wind, water, and the ache of your legs that reminded you that you were alive. I remember thinking, this is it. This is what I came for. But a week in, Sticks ran out of cash. Just like that, he packed his gear and hitched back to civilization. I can still see him standing on the dirt road, grinning, raising a hand in goodbye. That was the last time I saw him. After that, Ranger pushed on ahead. He had a faster pace than me, 30 miles a day easy, while I was lucky to manage 20. Eventually, I was alone, and I won't lie, at first I loved it. The silence, the sense that the world was stripped bare of everything except me and the trail. At night, I'd cowboy camp. No tent, just my bag under the stars. And I'd feel this weird peace. Like the mountains were keeping watch. But then something changed. About 2 weeks into hiking solo somewhere near Truckee, I got word that Ranger and a few others were meeting in Belden for a music festival. 60 miles north. I decided I'd push to get there. Problem was, the route I planned wasn't exactly part of the official PCT. I took what looked like a shortcut, some dirt roads that cut through the forest. That was mistake number one. The first night off trail, I set up my little tent near a dry creek bed, made some ramen, mixed powdered eggs, watched the sunset bleed into black. Everything was calm. I lay back in my sleeping bag, half dozing, half listening to the wind comb through the pines. Then I heard it. A deep, slow sniffing sound, right outside the tent. At first I figured it was a deer or maybe a coyote. I'd had animals wander close before, so I just shifted in my bag, made a little noise, expecting it to scurry off. Instead, the ground shook. There was this single heavy "ow-stomp-y," so loud and close it vibrated through the dirt beneath me. My whole body went rigid. My eyes shot open, heart pounding so hard I thought the thing outside could hear it. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe right. That stomp didn't sound like a bear. It didn't sound like anything I knew. It was upright, human almost, but heavier, like something standing on two legs that shouldn't be. After that, silence. No bugs, no wind, no night sounds at all. Just that suffocating, frozen quiet. I stared at the corner of my tent for what felt like hours, afraid to even blink. I remember my teeth chattering, my body trembling, every muscle screaming to run, but knowing if I moved, whatever was out there would hear me. I thought about Ranger, about Sticks, about how stupid it was to go off trail alone. Eventually, I must have passed out from sheer exhaustion. When I woke, sunlight was cutting through the trees. Everything looked normal. Too normal. No footprints I could see, no sign anything had been there. But the woods felt wrong. I packed up and got the hell out. Didn't eat, didn't rest. Just walked fast until I hit a road and managed to flag down a pickup. The guy barely slowed before I was climbing in. I don't even remember what I told him. Something about getting turned around on a side trail. I didn't mention the sniffing. The stomp. None of it. I made it to Belden and met up with Ranger. Spent the rest of the week glued to my group, trying to pretend nothing had happened. And for a while I convinced myself it was just a dream, or maybe my brain playing tricks after too many miles. But then Washington happened. That state has a presence to it, ancient, heavy. The trees there seem to watch you. The fog rolls in thick and slow swallowing sound. Ranger and I met another hiker up there named Tango, and for a while the three of us kept pace. But one morning they took off early and I lagged behind. And the feeling came back. That crawling, skin-prickling sense that something was following me. Not close, but not far either. Every so often I'd stop and whip around, scanning the woods. Once I thought I saw movement, dark and tall, gone before I could focus. I told myself it was nothing. But by the time I reached the Yakima Reservation stretch of the trail, I was done pretending. I couldn't sleep, couldn't relax. That's when I quit. I made it as far as Skycomish, Washington, then left the trail for good. Ranger and Tango kept going. They finished that year, made it all the way to Canada. I envied them at first. Then a few months later, word spread that another hiker, trail named Nomad, had vanished up near Rainy Pass. No remains, no gear, not a trace. That hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd met him early in the season before all this happened. We shared a campfire once, nice guy. And then, gone. I still think about that night sometimes. That sound, the sniffing, the stomp. The way the whole forest just stopped breathing. I've heard the theories. Bigfoot, spirits, lost miners, cults. But truth is, I don't know. Maybe no one does. All I know is that when you're out there, days from any road, surrounded by 1,000,000 acres of wilderness, you stop being the top of the food chain. You start to realize there are things in those woods that don't want to be seen. That move between the cracks of what we call real, people call the Pacific Crest Trail beautiful, sacred, free, but I'll tell you something I learned the hard way. It's watching you, and if it ever decides to look back too closely, you'll wish you never heard that first stomp. The Pacific Northwest was burning that summer. If you've ever lived here, you know that the wildfires aren't just something you see on the news. They choke the air, they tint the sun orange, they seep into your clothes. By September, the smoke maps looked like a field of little fire emojis stretching across California, Oregon, and Washington. My home hadn't been hit directly yet, but the heat and haze were closing in. Still, I went camping. Call it stupidity or habit, but solitude in the deep woods is my therapy. The Pacific Crest Trail has always been my escape. Weeks alone with nothing but the hiss of wind through fir trees, the faint smell of sap and soil, and that endless feeling of space that makes you remember how small you are. I'd been planning this trip long before the fires got bad. My spot was tucked deep in the wilderness, a place I'd been returning to for years. You couldn't find it unless you already knew it existed. A hidden valley beyond a logging road that wound up a ridge, then dropped into a bowl-shaped clearing surrounded by taller mountains. It took an hour's drive up a twisting 2-lane road, then another 30 minutes crawling along the old logging track. By the time I reached the crest, dusk had already started painting the sky purple. I parked my new Tacoma facing the clearing below, maybe 5 feet from the edge of a small drop-off. The slope leading down to the valley floor wasn't steep, just long, maybe 400 feet. But it was enough to make you feel like you were stepping down into another world. The air was still that night, and oddly silent. Usually I'd have a campfire going, crackling beside me while I cooked dinner. But with the wildfire bans, all I could use was a small propane stove. The smell of frying beans and canned sausage felt almost comically out of place against the vast dark forest. I remember finishing dinner just as the last rim of sunlight faded behind the western ridge. It was dark fast, like someone had flipped a switch. I slid off the tailgate, wiped my hands on my jeans, and reached for my keys. That's when I noticed something strange in the valley below. 2 small, flickering lights, white and circular, moving through the trees. At first, I thought it was reflection from something, fireflies maybe. But no, they moved too smoothly, too controlled. The sound reached me a few seconds later. A low mechanical hum. Motorcycles. 2 dirt bikes down in the valley. My first thought was confusion. Nobody came out here. Nobody. I'd been camping on that same slope for years and hadn't seen a soul. There were no nearby trails, no roads, just forest and rock and wind. The lights grew brighter as they approached the clearing. I crouched behind my truck, peering over the edge. The engines cut and the lights stopped moving. The valley went still again, except for the faint creak of metal settling. What the hell were they doing out here in the dark? I watched for a while, heart thudding, my breath visible in the cooling air. Every now and then I thought I saw movement around the lights, figures, shadows, but it was hard to tell. Then, in a split second of dumb instinct, I reached into my pocket and hit the unlock button on my truck keys. The Tacoma flashed its lights. The horn chirped. I froze. The valley below seemed to pause. Both bike lights turned sharply toward me. Shit, I hissed, dropping flat on my stomach behind the front tire. My pulse roared in my ears. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the engines roared back to life, louder this time, sharper. The lights veered and began to pull away, weaving back toward the woods at high speed. The hum echoed against the valley walls until it faded into silence. I stayed there on the dirt, trembling. I don't know how long I stayed like that, but the fear didn't fade easily. When I finally stood up, brushing dirt from my jeans, the woods felt different, charged, heavy. I couldn't shake the thought. People with good intentions don't flee when they see another camper. My mind began to spiral. Drug runners, meth cookers, arsonists. There'd been reports about that lately. Even whispers of people starting fires intentionally. Maybe they'd seen my truck before. Maybe they were coming back. I packed fast. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I threw gear into the truck bed. I decided not to leave immediately. If they were up the logging road, I might run straight into them. Instead, I drove a little way down, found a narrow gap carved into the mountain rock, and backed the Tacoma into it until the nose was hidden. Then I killed the lights and sat there in the dark, shotgun across my lap, seat reclined. Every sound outside seemed amplified, the wind through pine branches, a shifting pebble, the distant groan of the trees. I must have drifted off at some point because I woke to my alarm screaming, "My life for hire by a day to remember." 2 a.m. The world outside my windshield was brown and blurred. Smoke. When I stepped out, the air hit me like a furnace, dry, choking, and bitter. The smell of burning wood filled the air. There was a fire close by. I jumped back in, tore up the narrow road toward the crest, tires spitting gravel. The smoke grew thinner as I climbed, and that's when it hit me. The fire wasn't below. It was behind me, on the other side of the ridge, cutting off the road down. I was trapped. From the crest, I could see it. Thick plumes of smoke rising from the logging road I'd come up. Orange light flickering between the trees. The fire was racing uphill. Panic hit me like ice water. I grabbed my backpack, tore through it until I found my GPS satellite phone, flipped it open, and nearly cried when I saw the signal. I called 911, 15 minutes of explaining. My location, the valley, the fire line creeping closer. The operator transferred me to a helicopter pilot from a wildfire unit nearby. He said he knew the valley and could be there within 30 minutes. "Stay in the clearing," he told me. "Keep a visible position." I hung up, looked at my truck, and felt a strange pang of guilt. I knew I wasn't coming back for it. I grabbed what I could, knife, handgun, water, and started downhill toward the valley. My lungs screamed from the smoke, my eyes watered, my legs buckled twice on the descent. When I broke through the tree line at the clearing, I collapsed to my knees. The smoke above the valley was beginning to swirl in dark spirals, and to the west, I could see a wall of fire creeping along the ridge. I scanned the sky, listening for rotors, nothing. That's when I heard it, a sound that froze my blood. crying. At first, I thought it was an animal, a coyote or something wounded, but then I heard words, muffled, human, a woman's voice. "Hello," I called, hand instinctively going to my pistol. "Is someone there?" The sound came again, desperate, gagged. I ran toward it, stumbling through the clearing until I saw it. A crude square of plywood, maybe 4 by 8 feet, covered in branches and dirt. A heavy rock sat on top. The voice came from underneath. Oh my God. I dropped to my knees, shoving the boulder aside with every ounce of strength. It rolled off with a dull thud. I yanked the plywood up and froze. Inside a small dugout pit barely 4 feet deep was a woman, her wrists zip-tied, her mouth gagged with a torn strip of cloth. Her eyes went wide with terror when she saw me. "Jesus Christ," I breathed, pulling the gag free. "You're okay. You're okay." She started screaming, fast, high-pitched Spanish I couldn't understand. I cut the ties with my knife and she immediately began pointing behind me, repeating something, "Mi hija, mi hija." I turned. There were more plywood sheets, 4 of them, scattered in the clearing like makeshift graves. My stomach dropped. I ran to each one, ripping them up, clawing through dirt. But every hole was empty. The woman fell to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. Then, faint, distant, I heard it, the rhythmic chop of helicopter blades. "Come on," I yelled, helping her to her feet. We stumbled toward the clearing's edge as the helicopter dropped low through the smoky sky. Dust and ash swirled around us. A crewman jumped down and shouted, "You didn't tell us there were 2 of you." "I just found her," I screamed back. She was buried out here." The man's eyes went wide, but he didn't waste time. "Get in!" We climbed aboard, and the moment the door slammed, the pilot lifted us off the ground. Through the open side, I saw the fire crest the ridge, swallowing the slope. My red truck vanished into the smoke below. When we landed at base camp, the woman was rushed away by medics. I sat on a folding chair, shaking uncontrollably. My hands wouldn't unclench. I told my story 6 times, to deputies, to forest rangers, to state police. Hours blurred together. Eventually my wife arrived, eyes red, and took me home. But it didn't end there. Over the next 6 weeks, I was interviewed by everyone: state police, U.S. Marshals, ICE, even the FBI. Each time I told the story, it felt less real, like I was describing someone else's nightmare. The final interview was with 2 FBI agents, a man and a woman, both quiet, calm, careful with their words. After I finished recounting everything, the man leaned forward and said, "We believe you stumbled onto a human trafficking operation." He told me those 2 dirt bike riders were likely scouts or guards. When I hit my truck unlock, I'd spooked them. They probably went up the logging road looking for me. When they couldn't find me, they must have thought I'd gone for help. "So they started the fire," I said quietly. He nodded. "To destroy evidence?" I asked about the woman. He sighed. "She and her daughter were taken from Nicaragua. The traffickers were moving them north. There's evidence they were being sold to a foreign buyer." He paused, then added softly, "You found the mother. The daughter's still missing." I sat there, unable to speak, my mind replaying the image of those empty holes in the clearing. The agent's expression softened. "You were lucky you hid where you did. If they'd found you that night..." He trailed off. Then, almost as if to himself, he said, "You were in the right place at the right time. I think about that every night now. How close I came to dying out. There, how a single mistake, a flash of headlights might have exposed something no one was ever supposed to see, and sometimes in dreams, I still hear that woman's voice crying." When I think back to that day in Scad Valley, my chest still tightens like I'm being pulled back into that cabin. I've gone over it in my head 1,000 times, wondering how something so innocent could spiral into pure nightmare. I used to think horror stories belonged to other people, but what happened that afternoon shattered that illusion. Haley and I had been dating for about 2 years at that point. I was 26, she 24. We both worked full-time and barely had a weekend that lined up anymore. So when I got Friday off, we made plans to drive north, to a quiet little place I'd read about called Scad Valley. It was supposed to be remote and untouched, tucked between the Klamath Mountains and the lower Devil's Peaks. A hiker's dream, they said. We left Redding just after sunrise, the fog still low across the roads. By the time we rolled into Scad Valley, the sun was high enough to cast a clean light across the treetops, the air sharp and cold, the forest buzzing with that spring quiet you only get out there. We grabbed sandwiches from the only cafe in the valley and parked near the trailhead that looped toward Kangaroo Mountain. I remember how lighthearted we were. She teased me for overpacking, and I joked that bears respected preparedness. We laughed. God, we laughed so easily back then. The first few miles were perfect. Blue sky, the smell of pine needles baking in the sun, the rhythmic sound of our boots on dry soil. Around mid-afternoon, we started noticing smaller trails branching off the main one. Some looked like old game paths, others more deliberate, narrow but well-worn. One of them curved downhill through a cluster of alders. Haley spotted what looked like a chimney poking through the trees and said, "Bet it's an old cabin." We followed it maybe 100 meters before stepping into a small clearing. There it was, an old log cabin half hidden behind thickets of salal and manzanita, its roof sagging slightly under moss and shade. There was a truck parked outside, an old gray Ford with one door hanging open. The sight of it was off somehow. The cabin looked deserted, yet the engine ticked faintly like it had been run not long ago. Haley hesitated. "Ryan, maybe we shouldn't..." Before she could finish, the door of the cabin opened. A man stepped out, mid to late 30s, wearing a dirty flannel, jeans tucked into scuffed boots. He smiled like he'd been expecting company. "Afternoon, folks," he called. "You two are a long way off the main trail, ain't you?" Something in his voice made my stomach tighten, though I smiled back and said, "Yeah, just exploring. Beautiful out here." He nodded slowly, eyes flicking from me to Haley, then back again. "Sure is. You two want some coffee?" "Just brewed a pot inside." Haley shook her head politely. "No, thank you. We're trying to make it back before sunset." The man laughed, a short, hollow sound. "Aw, come on now, it's no trouble. Not often I get visitors. Been quiet out here lately." He started walking toward us. I could feel Haley's grip tighten around my hand. I said, "Really, we're fine," trying to sound casual. But he didn't stop. His smile flattened. "I said it's no trouble," he muttered, tone darkening. And before I could even process it, he reached behind his back and pulled out a pistol. "Get inside," he barked. For a second, I froze. My brain refused to believe what my eyes were seeing. I looked at Haley, saw her go pale, her mouth parting soundlessly. When the man raised the gun toward us, I realized there was no bluff in him. "Inside," he shouted again, waving the weapon. We did what he said. Every step toward that cabin felt like a nail being driven into my chest. Once we were inside, he slammed the door, locked it, and barked at us to sit down in the corner. My heart hammered so hard I could barely breathe. The cabin smelled of stale smoke and oil. Papers and cans were strewn across the table. Through the single window, I could see sunlight flicker across the forest. The man paced, muttering under his breath, glancing out the window like he expected someone any minute. Haley tried to speak. "Who's coming?" she asked, voice trembling. He ignored her. I asked louder, "Who are you talking about?" He turned so fast I barely saw his arm move before the butt of the gun cracked across my face. I dropped to the floor, blood hot on my cheek. Haley screamed, "Shut up!" He roared, "Both of you shut up!" For a long moment, there was only the sound of my breathing and the low creak of floorboards under his boots. He went back to the window, muttering again, words like, "They'll find me," and "not again." His hands trembled slightly. Whoever he was desperate. Minutes stretched into an hour. My cheek throbbed. My thoughts raced. Haley sat beside me, clutching my arm. I whispered to her, "We'll be okay. Just stay quiet." She nodded, tears streaking her face. Outside, the air changed. I heard something faint, a distant thumping, rhythmic. Then another sound, the faint roar of engines climbing the dirt road. The man stiffened. "They're here," he whispered. Haley and I exchanged a look. He rushed to the window, scanning the sky. I followed his gaze through a crack in the shutter and saw it. The faint outline of a helicopter sweeping low over the trees. That's when I understood. They were the police. Whoever this guy was, he'd been running and we were his shield. He turned toward us, gun trembling in his hand. "If they come in here, you're dead. You hear me? You make one move and I'll shoot you both." We nodded, too terrified to speak. The thumping grew louder. Shouts echoed from outside. Orders barked through loudspeakers. "This is the sheriff's department. Put down your weapon and come out with your hands up." The man laughed, a wild, broken sound. He grabbed Haley by the arm, yanking her upright. "You hear that? You're coming with me," he snarled. She screamed, struggling as he dragged her toward the window. "Show your face," he yelled. "Show your face, girl. Let them see you." He shoved the gun up under her chin and screamed through the broken window. "You come any closer, I'll blow her head off." I've never felt more powerless in my life. I could only whisper, "Haley, it's okay. It's going to be okay," even though I didn't believe it. From outside, a voice answered calmly, "We're not coming in. Nobody wants to get hurt. Put down the weapon. Back off." The man screamed. "Back off or she dies." Haley sobbed uncontrollably as he dragged her back to the corner, keeping the gun on both of us. His breathing was frantic, erratic. "They think they're smart," he muttered. "Think they can box me in? Not this time." He ran back to the window and fired. The crack of the gun was deafening. I hit the floor, ears ringing. The window shattered. A split second later, bullets ripped through the wall. The man ducked, cursing, then turned the gun on me. "Kneel," he shouted. "What?" "Kneel, goddammit!" My legs moved on instinct. I dropped to my knees, hands behind my head. He pressed the barrel of the gun against the back of my skull. I could feel the cold steel trembling. Outside, the shouting grew louder. I heard boots pounding on dirt, the whine of radios, a low command I couldn't make out. He screamed, "You come in here, I'll kill him. You hear me?" I shut my eyes. My heart pounded so violently I thought it would stop. I told myself not to cry, not to piss myself, not to make Haley see me die like that. I heard her whispering my name, broken, pleading. Then everything erupted, a burst of gunfire. Glass shattering. The thunder of boots slamming against wood. My ears went blank from the shockwave. I hit the floor, certain I'd been shot. For a moment I couldn't hear, couldn't think. Just the ringing and the smell of gunpowder. When sound came back, I realized I was still breathing. I opened my eyes. The man lay a few feet away, his chest moving in shallow spasms. Blood spread under him. His gun was gone. SWAT officers flooded in, shouting commands that barely registered. One of them crouched beside me. "You okay? Are you hurt?" I tried to answer, but no words came out. I just stared at the man who had nearly killed us, watching the light fade from his eyes. There was no satisfaction in it, just disbelief. One moment he'd been the center of my terror. The next he was nothing. They pulled us outside. The air was shockingly cold. I remember the red and blue lights spinning against the tree trunks, the helicopter blades stirring dust and pine needles into a storm around us. Someone wrapped a blanket around Haley. She didn't speak. She just kept shaking, her face blank except for the tracks of dried tears. We were questioned for hours, driven back into town, then released. I don't remember much of what I said. I just remember sitting in the car afterward, Haley curled into my shoulder, both of us crying so hard we could barely breathe. We made it back to Redding long after midnight. Neither of us slept that night. We just sat wrapped in blankets on her couch, listening to the refrigerator hum, staring into space. The silence was deafening. We stayed together for a few more years after that, but something between us changed. There's no clean way to go through something like that and come out the same. By 2014, we split, amicably, quietly. She moved to Sacramento for work. I stayed behind. We still talk, though. Every few months, a call, a FaceTime, a quiet check-in. And no matter how long it's been, that day always comes up. I never went to therapy. Haley did. She said it helped, but she also said no one really understands unless they were there. And she's right. Because when I close my eyes, I can still hear that man yelling. Still feel the cold metal at the back of my head. It's strange how one afternoon can divide your life into before and after. And maybe that's what survival really is. Not just walking away, but learning to live with the sound of that gun pressed against your skull, knowing you were one breath away from never walking out at all. My cousin, Ethan's, and I had been living in Oregon for about 3 years when it happened. We'd always shared a love for the outdoors. Grew up side by side, hiking, fishing, and exploring every scrap of wild land we could find as kids. So when we finally found a small house on the outskirts of a quiet town near the Pacific Crest Trail, it felt like fate. The woods were right there. The air smelled like pine and rain, and the mountains stood like sleeping giants in the distance. That spring, we decided to take a 3-day hike through one of the less traveled stretches of the PCT. No tourists, no other hikers, just us in the forest. We wanted to camp far from civilization to disconnect for a bit. We packed carefully. Tents, sleeping bags, food, water, a first aid kit, flashlights, and of course the handgun Ethan always carried. He said it was for bears or emergencies. I'd always teased him about it, but after that trip I never laughed at that idea again. The first day was perfect. The kind of day that almost feels like a reward for surviving city life. The air was crisp, the sky clear, and we barely saw another soul. We hiked miles through switchbacks under thick canopies of fir and cedar. The only sounds were our boots crunching on the trail and the far-off calls of birds. When the sun dipped low, we found a small plateau overlooking the forest. Quiet, isolated, and flat enough to pitch our tents. We set up camp, cooked a small meal, and sat by the fire watching the stars appear one by one. It was peaceful. Too peaceful, maybe. Around 10, the forest had gone completely still. No crickets, no owls, just the soft crackle of fire. That's when we heard mine footsteps. They came slow, measured. Someone was walking along the trail toward us. Ethan and I looked at each other. We hadn't seen another hiker all day. Whoever it was had no reason to be out there this late. The footsteps drew closer until the faint outline of a tall man appeared beyond the firelight. His face was hidden in shadow, but his arms were raised, holding something in front of him. For a split second, I thought it was a flashlight. Then I realized it was a camera. "Evening, fellas," the man said in a casual, almost cheerful tone. The firelight flickered across his face as he stepped closer, revealing a forced, unnatural smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mind if I film for a minute? I'm doing a piece on the Pacific Crest Trail about the murders that happened up here a few years back." That word, murdersawar, hung in the air like smoke. Ethan froze. I felt my stomach twist. There had been a series of killings around this area 3 years ago. Hikers found mutilated along the ridge. Only one of the killers had ever been caught. The man didn't seem to notice our discomfort. He moved closer, his camera lens reflecting the firelight like a cold black eye. "Crazy stuff, huh?" he continued, his voice almost excited. "Imagine being out here, middle of nowhere, no one around for miles, and then, bam, someone walks into your camp." He laughed softly at his own words. Something about him was deeply wrong. His tone was too calm, his grin too steady. His clothes were dark and clean, like he hadn't been hiking at all. There was no backpack, no gear, no water bottle, nothing to suggest he'd come far on foot. Ethan finally spoke. "Hey man, we don't want to be in your video. You should move along, all right?" The man tilted his head, still holding the camera steady. "Oh, come on. You boys look tough. You armed?" The question caught me off guard. Ethan's voice hardened. "We're fine. Turn that thing off and leave." The man smirked. "Relax, I'm just documenting." Real people, real fear. That's what gets views. Real fear. That's when I noticed it. His eyes weren't on Ethan. They were darting just past him, toward the tree line behind our camp. His lips curled slightly like he was suppressing a laugh. Ethan's hand brushed mine. His voice was a low whisper, barely audible over the fire. "There's someone in the trees behind you." My blood ran cold. I didn't move. Didn't turn. The air around us suddenly felt heavier, suffocating. Ethan stood slowly and unzipped his backpack with one precise motion. The metallic click of the pistol's safety echoed louder than I thought possible. He raised the gun and aimed it right at the cameraman's chest. "You've got 5 seconds to get the hell away from here." The man didn't flinch, didn't blink. Instead, he lowered the camera slightly and smiled wider. The firelight made his teeth gleam. "Oh," he said softly, almost whispering. "This is the part where it gets good." Ethan's voice was a growl. "Now, still nothing." The man just stood there, eyes locked on us, breathing slow and calm. Then Ethan fired. The gunshot shattered the silence. The bullet struck the dirt inches from the man's feet, sending up a burst of soil and smoke. That's when the forest exploded with movement. From the shadows, 3 men bolted in different directions, dark figures that had been hiding there the entire time. I saw one of them clutch something metallic, maybe a knife, as they disappeared into the trees. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard it hurt. Ethan shouted, swinging the gun toward the forest. "Go, get out of here!" But the cameraman didn't move. He just stood there, watching, breathing. After a long moment, he tilted his head again, studying us like we were insects in a jar. Then he calmly reached up, pressed a button on his camera, and the little red recording light blinked off. "Guess we'll save the ending for later," he murmured. And just like that, he turned and walked back into the darkness. We didn't stay to find out if he'd come back. We grabbed what we could, half our gear still strewn across the ground, and took off down the trail, running, stumbling, crashing through brush. The forest swallowed us whole. Every branch snapping behind us sounded like a footstep. Every shadow felt alive. I remember gasping for breath, my legs shaking, my throat raw from cold air and panic. We didn't stop until the sky turned gray with dawn. When we finally reached the trailhead and saw Ethan's truck parked in the clearing, we both nearly collapsed. He fumbled the keys, hands trembling. "Get in," he muttered. "Just get in." The drive back to town was a blur. My mind kept replaying that man's smile, that awful calm, the way he spoke about real fear. At the police station, we told them everything about the man, the camera, the others hiding in the woods. The officers took notes, asked questions, and exchanged looks that made my stomach turn. One of them eventually pulled out a file folder and laid a photo on the table. "Is this him?" My mouth went dry. The face staring back at me was the same one I'd seen across the campfire. His name was Jamie. A Canadian fugitive wanted for 09 murders. He'd been crossing state lines, targeting hikers in remote wilderness areas. The police said they'd send teams into the forest to search, that we'd likely be called to testify later. Later, we never heard back. I was never what you'd call outdoorsy. As a kid, I was the quiet one, the boy who preferred his books. So when people ask me now why I ever thought hiking deep into the wilderness with strangers was a good idea, I don't really have an answer. After college, I lost touch with a few friends who once dragged me along to weekend trails and short hikes. For years, I didn't step foot on a single path. But one night, while browsing online, I stumbled across a Facebook group called Frontier Trekkers. Their page looked legitimate, filled with photos, reviews, and comments from real people. They organized hiking trips for all levels, short one-day excursions or week-long backcountry expeditions where you carried your own tent, food, and whatever courage you had left. It seemed safe enough. They even had a leader, Martin Hale, who claimed he'd been guiding expeditions for 15 years. The post showed smiling hikers at mountain summits, group photos under star-filled skies. The comments were full of gratitude, stories of life-changing experiences. I didn't think twice. I signed up. There were 7 of us in total when we set out. Martin, the leader, mid-40s, tall, confident, the kind of man who spoke like he'd seen it all. Then there was David and Aaron, a couple from Portland, clearly seasoned hikers, carrying ultralight packs and speaking in shorthand about trail miles and elevation gain. Lena, a quiet woman who kept mostly to herself, always adjusting her compass or jotting something in a weatherproof notebook. Kyle, a thin, quiet guy with an oddly unreadable face, the kind of person who made silence feel heavy. Nina, the youngest, full of energy and questions, probably in her early 20s, and me, just trying to keep up, already doubting every decision I'd made. 2 jeeps dropped us off at a remote access point far along the Pacific Crest Trail, somewhere between Oregon and Northern California, miles from any road or cell service. When the engines faded into the distance, all that remained was the sound of wind through the pines. The plan was to hike for 7 days straight, camping each night at predetermined clearings until we reached the pickup point. Simple, safe, or so Martin made it sound. The first day went by uneventfully. The sun dipped behind the ridgeline as we set up camp, our bodies aching from the long trek. The air cooled quickly, and Martin built a fire that crackled and hissed as we gathered around. Someone passed a flask. Laughter echoed into the darkness. That first night was almost beautiful. The stars stretching endlessly above us, the forest humming softly around the firelight. I remember feeling something close to peace. But later, deep into the night, I woke up. It took me a few seconds to realize what stirred me. The fire had burned down to faint embers, casting a dull orange glow across the tents. My breath fogged faintly in the cold. And then I saw it, a shadow, gliding silently across the thin fabric of my tent wall. Someone, or something, was moving past. I froze, listening. Soft footsteps, deliberate, then nothing. I thought maybe it was Martin checking on everyone, or David heading out to relieve himself. So I forced myself to relax, turned over, and waited until exhaustion pulled me under again. Morning came with the familiar shuffle of zippers and voices, but within minutes a tension rippled through the camp. Martin was gone. At first, no one panicked. It wasn't unusual for him to be up early, scouting the trail or collecting water. But when half an hour passed, then an hour, unease set in. His tent was untouched, sleeping bag neatly rolled, boot still inside, GPS unit resting by his pack. The weirdest part? His boots. No one hikes barefoot in the wilderness. No one. His canteen was knocked over near the entrance. And that was it, as if he'd simply stood up in the night, stepped outside and vanished into the dark. We searched in pairs, calling his name, scouring the ridgelines, but the forest was still and unnaturally still. Not a single trace of movement, not even footprints. By late afternoon, the light was fading. David suggested we camp where we were in case Martin found his way back. Kyle was the one who insisted we stay put. He said moving without a guide could get us all lost. I didn't like the way he said it. Calm but firm, like he was stating something absolute. The next morning, we made a plan. Kyle volunteered to hike up the nearby slope to search for cell service, and Aaron offered to go with him. They left just after sunrise. Hours passed. The rest of us sat around the extinguished fire, avoiding each other's eyes. When Kyle and Aaron finally returned, she looked pale, distant, like she'd seen something she couldn't talk about. He looked exactly the same as before, quiet, unreadable. What happened? I asked her privately later. Nothing, she said quickly. No signal. But her hands were shaking. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the way she'd looked at him, frightened, uncertain. Every noise in the forest made me flinch. I swear at one point I heard whispering outside my tent, soft, uneven breaths. But when I looked out, the woods were black and silent. Just before dawn, I jolted awake to Kyle shouting. He stumbled toward the fire pit, clothes torn, face pale. "Something grabbed me," he gasped. "It tried to pull me down." His words sent everyone into a frenzy. David grabbed a flashlight, scanning the trees. Nina was trembling. Lena just stood there, clutching her notebook. But something about his story didn't fit. His clothes were ripped, but his skin was unmarked. Not a single scratch. And then Erin was gone. Her tent was empty. Sleeping bag still zipped, boots inside. The realization hit us all at once. 2 people gone, the guide and now her. And Kyle's story suddenly sounded like a performance. He muttered something about creatures, about someone moving in the dark. But I could see it now, his eyes cold and deliberate, watching us all as we argued what to do next. I didn't say a word. I pretended to believe him. We packed quickly that morning. I told the group we needed to hike until we found service, that sitting here would only make things worse. Kyle hesitated, as if debating whether to go along. Then he agreed. We hiked in silence. My pulse hammered in my throat the entire time. Every time he fell behind me, I imagined him pulling a knife. Every time he walked ahead, I imagined him luring us into something. 45 minutes later, I looked down at my phone. 1 bar. Then 2. Signal. We'd barely gone 2 miles. How the hell hadn't he found it before? My stomach turned. I could see it in his eyes too. That flicker of surprise, then frustration. We called for help immediately. Within an hour, a helicopter circled above the ridge. Search and rescue arrived by evening. They combed the forest for days, drones, dogs, volunteers, but they never found Martin or Erin. Not a single trace. I told the authorities everything I'd seen, everything I suspected, but nothing ever came of it. Of us walked out of that forest, alive. And I can't shake the feeling that Martin didn't just disappear. Someone made sure he never came back, and if I hadn't kept my mouth shut that morning, maybe I wouldn't have either. My name is Daniel Mercer, a senior investigator with the Oregon State Police. I've worked homicide for 12 years, and I've seen my share of dark things, poachers gone mad, even cult activity near Mount Hood. But what I found off the Pacific Crest Trail that July was something different. It started as a missing persons call. 6 recent high school graduates hadn't returned from their camping trip near the Yaw Bridge of the Gods, along the Columbia River Gorge. By the time I got the report, 2 hikers had already been found, one alive, one barely. What was left of the others was waiting for me deeper in the woods. I remember stepping out of my truck that afternoon and smelling alpine sap and iron. The forest air twisted with something wrong. That was always the giveaway. Blood has a way of poisoning nature's scent even before your eyes find where it spilled. They brought the surviving girl down from the ridge first. Name: Brooke Halstead. 18, from Vancouver. Her face was scratched raw, hair tangled, shoes gone. She was in shock, trembling under an emergency blanket, eyes locked on the tree line as if afraid something still lurked there. When I asked her what happened, she didn't hesitate. Her first words were, "They hung them. They hung them on crosses." That was when I knew this wasn't a rescue anymore. It was a recovery. Brooke's account came out in broken fragments pieced together through tears and long silences. I spent hours with her that night, trying to get every detail while she was still coherent. She said they were 6 friends on a farewell trip before college. Brooke and her boyfriend, Evan Turner, their loudmouth friend, Noah Briggs, and his girlfriend, Tara, and the twin sisters, Samantha and Kayla Reed. They were good kids from decent families, no history of trouble. They met up at the Bridge of the Gods, a narrow metal span above the Columbia River where the Pacific Crest Trail winds through the gorge. They crossed the bridge on foot, loaded with gear and went off trail to camp by the river. It was supposed to be perfect, she said. Mountains, water, stars, nothing but us in the wild. That first night, the air was clear and still. The group built a fire, passed around beers and weed, and joked about the next chapter of their lives. It was the kind of peace young people think will last forever. Then Evan noticed something out on the river, a flat-bottomed boat, drifting near the bank. Two people stood inside it, silhouettes under the half-moon. Both wore bright orange hoodies and faces hidden by the shadows. They were just watching, Brooke whispered. Not moving, not talking. Noah, always the show-off, grabbed his haunt flare gun, fired it toward the boat to light him up. The flare streaked across the water and burst in the air, red light washing over everything. For 2 heartbeats, the river glowed blood orange. Brooke said she saw their faces then, or at least part of them.
Yeah, mascas.
Camouflage, maybe nylon. They didn't flinch, she said. They just stared like the light didn't bother them. Moments later, the boat engine roared and disappeared upriver. They laughed it off, of course. Young, drunk, high. They went to bed thinking it was over. The next morning, their laughter was gone. The campsite had been ransacked. Coolers missing, food gone, flashlights, even their compass and phones. And tied to a root near the water's edge was that same boat. Evan and Noah found large boot prints in the sand. Not one set, many. That's when the fear started to take hold. They didn't know how far they'd strayed from the trail the night before, and now their only navigation gear was gone. Noah wanted to go back toward the hills. Evan wanted to follow the river. They argued until Noah suggested splitting up to cover ground. 3 pairs, 2 each. It's the kind of decision that makes sense when you think danger is still far away, Brooke. Went with Evan. They moved west along the river, while the others cut north through the brush. It was quiet, she told me. Too quiet. No birds, no wind. Just us and the crunch of leaves. Then Evan stopped mid-step, his eyes fixed on something beyond the trees. Brooke followed his gaze and froze. About 30 yards ahead stood a man in an orange hunting hoodie and a camouflage mask, watching them. He didn't move, didn't speak. The air between them was heavy, like the forest itself was holding its breath. When Evan called out, the man only tilted his head. Brooke swore she saw the barrel of a rifle slung over his shoulder. Then another orange figure appeared behind him. That's when I knew we weren't lost, Brooke said. We were being herded. Evan grabbed her hand and they ran. She tripped, hurt her wrist, but he pulled her up again. Behind him, the masked men were closing in. They sprinted through the brush until the trees opened up into a clearing, a wide patch of scorched ground, smoke still curling from a burnt-out fire. Then, as if drawn by fate, the rest of their group came crashing through from different directions, all 5 of them. We thought we'd found each other, she said. But that was what they wanted. I visited that clearing later myself. Even in daylight it felt wrong. The ground was stamped with boot prints, large ones, a dozen or more. The burned fire pit was still warm. Someone had been there not long before we arrived. According to Brooke, they had only seconds of relief before the nightmare began. From every direction, men in orange hoodies and camo masks stepped out of the trees. Not 2, not 3, but a full circle of them. Brooke counted at least 3 and 12. Some carried rifles, others machetes. Their faces were hidden. Noah tried to act tough, shouting, demanding they back off. 2 of the masked men grabbed the twins, Samantha and Kayla, by their hair, dragging them toward the tree line as they screamed. Evan and Noah charged to help. Noah swung a fist and dropped one of the attackers. For a moment, it seemed like they might break through, until the first gunshot cracked through the clearing. Brooke said it was deafening, a single thunderous boom. Everything stopped, she whispered. Then I saw Noah fall. He dropped instantly, blood pouring from his chest. Evan turned, his face twisted in shock, and took 2 steps before another shot tore through the side of his head. Brooks said the sound wasn't like in movies. It was wet, heavy, final. The twins' screams were cut off a second later. Tara tried to run, but Brooke grabbed her, pulled her into the trees, and they bolted together, dodging branches, sliding on roots, lungs burning. Behind them came the sound of boots, laughter, and more gunfire. They ran until their legs gave out. Then they stumbled onto the trail and the Pacific Crest itself, the same one they'd wandered from the day before. That's where they flagged down a passing hiker who called 911. I saw what those bastards left behind. No amount of training prepares you for that kind of scene. 2 wooden crosses had been erected at the center of the clearing. Samantha and Kayla hung from them, arms outstretched, torsos slit open. Their intestines were tied together between the crosses, strung up like grotesque ribbons. Below them lay the bodies of Evan and Noah, both shot at close range. Evan's skull was shattered. Noah's chest had been opened with a hunting knife. We found Tara's body half a mile away 2 days later in a shallow creek. Her neck was broken. The killers left no tracks. After that point, no tire marks, no prints beyond the clearing. The boat they'd used vanished from the river overnight. The only survivor was Brooke Halstead. Honestly, I still see her face sometimes. We never caught them. No trace. The orange hoodies became a ghost story around the department. Hunters who weren't really hunters. Men who vanished back into the woods after their work was done. I've closed a lot of cases in my career. This isn't one of them.